Now, Weekend Wellness with Brittany King and Myra Lawrence on CFAX 1070.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. It's another Saturday here on CFAX 1070 with Weekend Wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Looking forward to our show today, Brittany. And when we talk about young people, we're talking about mental health and mental awareness and just being healthy, not only in our bodies, but in our brains and how important that is.
Absolutely. Joining us from Synergy on the corner of Quadra and Mackenzie, she's a registered clinical counselor and mental health specialist, Tamara Darymple. Thank you so much for joining us, Tamara.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Tamara, when we talk about mental health, what are we talking about?
Right. Well, according to the Canadian Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a mental health problem in any given year. And that could be a variety of mental health issues. Some of the most common ones that we know, anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar, OCD, schizophrenia. There's a lot of mental health disorders. But in Canada, about 500,000 Canadians miss work every day due to some form of mental illness.
Wow.
Yeah.
500,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a feeling of maybe waking up and not wanting to get out of bed that day?
I would think, yep.
Wow.
So I guess what exactly is, how do you make the distinction between depression and just feeling down?
Right, that's a really good question. Really, for most mental health issues, the thing is, most of us have days where we're feeling blue, we're down. That's a normal part of life. But when it becomes depression is when these symptoms start interfering with our daily functioning, and it becomes sort of impairing also physically. There's a few different types of depressive disorders, but some of the major symptoms of depression include having a low mood most of the day. That can come out as irritability in children or adolescents. Reduced interest in activities that you used to enjoy to the point of, people get isolated. They're kind of just not engaging with the world anymore. And then there's physical symptoms as well.
What are some of the physical symptoms?
Some of the physical symptoms can include sleep problems, appetite disturbance, weight loss, weight gain, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and then also some of those negative self-defeating thoughts, the feelings of worthlessness, negative self-esteem, and for some people, thoughts of suicide as well. Not all people will experience all of those symptoms, but probably at least 4 or 5.
Wow. That's a lot of people that are... What is it about our society right now? Are we just talking about it more now, or are we under more stress and higher expectations these days that we're actually speaking about mental illness?
It's hard to say. We have stats just in terms of the amount of people that we think are affected, but at the same time, 49% of people report that they have probably experienced symptoms of anxiety or depression, but they've never talked to their doctor or therapist about it. But in terms of what's reported, like I say, 1 in 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Tamara, I guess when someone if someone's, uneducated about it and doesn't really know much about depression or anxiety, they might say, snap out of it. Mm-hmm. Do something that makes you happy. Stop moping. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously, it's not a matter of that because it is a chemical imbalance, right?
That's right, yeah.
So what is exactly happening internally that is giving us depression, say?
Right. Well, okay, so if you're talking about depression, there's certain things are happening. The frontal lobe isn't activated in the brain the way it normally would be, and certain neurotransmitters in the brain aren't getting activated, so there's not as much serotonin, and there's a couple other transmitters as well that are affected, dopamine and norepinephrine. But so chemically, that's why antidepressants can help too, because they can sort of help regulate those neurotransmitters in the brain. And then there's those physical symptoms as well that are real. So for someone with depression, it's hard to just snap out of it unless they actually get treatment.
Right. Mm. So where do we get, it's a lack of serotonin, you said, part of it.
Yeah,
where can we get serotonin then, in a pill form?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a few different ways. so some of the treatments would be cognitive behavioral therapy or interpersonal therapy or medications. All of those have proven to be equally effective and really effective in combination as well, medications and therapy. But sometimes therapy alone can be helpful. And part of that is just re-engaging with the world again, learning strategies to kind of handle those negative self-defeating thoughts. And because we're more vulnerable to sort of negative interpretations of the world when we're feeling depressed, and we're learning skills to sort of regulate that and monitor that. And as we're starting to re-engage with the world, our frontal lobe gets activated again. Medications can help as well. They block receptors so that there's an adequate flow of chemicals that need to be flowing in the brain as well. But sometimes therapy can help with that too. Yeah.
So a combination of therapy and maybe medication. What about getting enough sleep, proper diet, and nutrition? Are those things that can help as well, Tamara?
Very helpful, yes. I mean, sleep is actually one of the number one determinants of something going on. So those are all things that people need to do to take care of themselves. And that's actually part of the things that are addressed in therapy as well, sleep, exercise, social connections, activity, all those kinds of things, yeah.
Is it common for someone, say, with depression to go on medication and then, they even out and they feel good and decide maybe they want to try not taking a pill?
Yep, that can happen as well. Sometimes people start to feel better and it doesn't always have to be a long-term thing. It just sort of varies, by the individual, and it's sort of a case-by-case. And not every individual needs to go on medication, even though often therapy is very effective, too. So it sort of just depends on sort of their preference, for one thing, and, availability, that kind of thing, for treatment. It's also helpful to see a doctor just to rule out any medical issues as well, because there's some medical conditions like a thyroid disorder or vitamin deficiency. They can sort of present as similar symptoms of depression, so it's kind of good to see a doctor and rule out anything medical first that could be going on, and then also talk to your doctor. Doctors can help make referrals to treatment professionals as well, or can prescribe medication.
Right. Is depression often brought on? Is there a trigger or a life event that happens, or like we talk about concussions or things like that can bring it on?
Sometimes. I mean, it's sort of what they've kind of come to realize is it's sort of it can be a combination of sort of biological factors, environmental factors, life factors. Sometimes it just sort of happens out of the blue and people don't understand why. They don't know. But then sometimes there's very real reasons why. Something's happened in a person's life, a trauma, a loss. But, it's not the same for everyone. So we know that it's a combination of factors for different people.
Why do we find it, Tamara, do you think that, we're here at Bell Media, we're very much involved in the Bell Let's Talk campaign, and we want people to get talking, but that stigma is still out there. People don't want to admit that they are suffering with depression, anxiety, bipolar, because you can't see it. What do you suggest to people who are experiencing any of those symptoms that you've just listed off for us?
Yeah, I think know that you're not alone. I mean, some of the stats that Canadian Mental Health Association is putting out there, 2 in 3 people suffer in silence, fearing judgment and rejection. In Canada, 1 out of 5 people who need mental health services receive them. So, you're not alone in experiencing these symptoms, and doctors are very skilled in understanding and treating these symptoms and referring to mental health professionals or clinical counselors in the community. So, I think talking about it is helpful, but it's going to the doctor first and letting them know, what you're experiencing, and then kind of going from there.
Tamara, what's happening with could you describe, I guess, OCD and what that means and how it's affecting us and our bodies?
Sure. So OCD, otherwise known as obsessive-compulsive disorder, on the Anxiety BC site, they basically say it affects 1 to 2% of the population.
Okay.
And it's generally been considered an anxiety disorder, but it's in the new DSM, in the new Diagnostical Statistic Manual, they have it listed as more of obsessive-compulsive and impulse control kind of issue. But when individuals have this, they have obsessions or sort of unwanted thoughts, make them anxious, and then they may engage in compulsions, and that's sort of repetitive behaviors or mental acts to sort of reduce that feeling of anxiety. So some of those compulsions could be hand washing, checking, tapping, mental routines, counting backwards, that kind of thing. And, yeah, it's very distressing. And so that's another disorder that's treated very well by medications in combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and what we call exposure therapy, systematic desensitization.
That's going to be exhausting.
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
For the individual.
Very distressing. Yeah.
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 Or when you don't want to leave your house, like agoraphobia, I believe?
Agoraphobia, yep. And that often accompanies to social anxiety disorder as well. And that's the social anxiety is about 7 to 13% of the population. So that's a pretty significant.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
17% versus 1 to 2 with OCD.
Yeah.
Wow.
So is depression, I guess, the leading form of mental illness?
Not necessarily. Depression and anxiety are pretty close. Often anxiety precedes depression. Well, that's what they found. So often anxiety not always, but it comes first a lot, and then it's often followed by depression. And that kind of makes sense in a way.
Right.
I mean, especially if it's not treated. So, if the anxiety can be treated, and that's why there's initiatives even in some of the elementary schools. The BC government has offered the Friends program to sort of start giving children those skills, because 70% of mental health problems have their onset during childhood or adolescence.
Right.
So, if we can start detecting that earlier,
we can start helping, right?
Yeah, children can start learning those tools, cognitive tools to manage sort of those anxious and depressive thoughts. And then they have those skills, they have those tools to carry with them throughout life, which are going to assist in their coping and resilience.
I'm interested in learning about some of those tools. We have to take a quick break here. We are talking to Tamara Darymple. She's with Synergy. And Synergy what? Synergy
Health Center.
Synergy Health Centers. We're talking mental health, depression, anxiety, bipolar, and we're going to come back with Weekend Wellness in just a few. Stay with us.
Budget of Victoria Car and Truck Rental knows how busy it gets this time of year, and that sometimes your regular vehicle just won't cut it. Whether you're doing yard work, shuttling your kids' soccer team around,
there's so much space in here,
or taking a much-needed weekend getaway and want something a little more luxurious.
Ooh, heated seats.
Whatever the activity, Budget of Victoria has exactly what you need. So leave your regular vehicle in the garage and rent with the friendly local team at Budget of Victoria Car and Truck Rental. Google them, find them on Facebook or budgetvictoria.com.
Good morning, my friends. Good of you to join us today. And it's good afternoon, isn't it? My goodness sakes, you take a look at the clock. Time goes fast when you're having fun, right? Well, good afternoon. Fall Home Expo at Perks Rec Center at Telecom Mall. With me is Michael Allison. He is the Corporate Communications Advisor for our good friends over at Fortis BC. We've talked about heating. We've talked about oil. We've talked about things that you've got to do around your home. And you also talked a little while ago about the importance, of checking your doors and the weather stripping and all. Let's talk overall about insulation and why all of that is important in reducing the whole envelope of heating costs.
Yeah, so as we discussed earlier, your home heating costs can amount to over 50% of your entire energy bill. And so under-insulated walls are a little bit of a risk, resulting in higher energy costs and an uncomfortable home. And so as part of Fortis BC's home energy rebate offer, we do offer rebates of up to $600 for insulating attics, and $1,000 for basements or crawl spaces. And so customers can go check that out at fortisbc.com/home rebates and see if it fits for them.
Saving you money and giving you the opportunity to save far more money come the 2015 in January when they introduced the common rates, and we'll tell you more about that later on today as well. Check it out for yourself when you're coming down here to the Fall Home Expo here at Perks. Fortis BC have a display. They got some absolutely sensational socks. They've also got ways for you to take all kinds of material home and check it out for yourself as well. See you soon.
Wild Ark is the only wildlife rehabilitation center on southern Vancouver Island, treating over 2,500 wild animals annually. Experience the journey of these wild patients at the Fall for Wildlife dinner auction on November 1st at the 4 Points by Sheraton Gateway. Celebrate with animal lovers, view never-before-seen video montages, bid at the silent auction, and support the life-saving work of the BC SPCA Wild Ark. For tickets, go to bcspca.ca/wildark-auction.
Customers, first and foremost, not just a slogan. It is what we commit to each and every day. Everyone has the right to expect professional service either buying or selling real estate. Our goal is to fulfill this principle. Gary, Kathleen, and Blair McInnes, 250-727-1037. Call us today at Pemberton Homes Limited, the island's largest real estate brokerage, where customers are first and foremost. 250-727-1037.
It's the Toyota Happy 50th event at Metro Lexus Toyota. For a limited time, there's huge savings on most of our 2014 models, and we're offering 0% financing on select models. The Toyota Happy 50th event at Metro Lexus Toyota, Douglas, across from Mayfair.
Welcome back to Weekend Wellness on CFAX 1070. Tamara Darymple is a registered clinical counselor and mental health specialist at Synergy on the corner of Quadra and Mackenzie. They do so much there. We've been having a great conversation with Tamara talking about mental health awareness, anxiety, depression, bipolar. Tamara, before the break, you were talking about how anxiety often leads to depression. So in theory, if we get the anxiety symptoms looked at sooner, we can curb the depression. To moms and dads listening, what are we looking for in our kids as far as symptoms of anxiety?
Right, so there's different types of anxiety disorders. So some of the most common ones are generalized anxiety, sort of panic attacks or panic disorder, social anxiety, separation anxiety, and separation anxiety is often prevalent in children. Symptoms of generalized anxiety generally include excessive anxiety or worried about a number of things. So that could be school, work, for adults, and the worries actually become really difficult to control. And then with generalized anxiety, there's also often the physical symptoms. So that could include muscle tension, sleep disturbance, irritability, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, or restlessness. But for sure, it's that sort of ongoing worry that's, interfering basically with, daily functioning kind of thing. Yeah.
I have actually had a panic attack, and it was the most frightening experience of my entire life. I thought I was dying.
Wow.
I was sweating profusely. I actually ended up in emergency.
Where were you at the time?
I lived in Saskatchewan. I left work that day. I couldn't sit still. My eyes were like shifting back and forth, and I couldn't breathe. And I was just like I felt like I had this massive weight on my chest. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And then that just kind of started to cycle throughout my head and my brain. And then it was like before I knew it, I ended up in emergency. They hooked me up to heart monitors, and then they sent me home.
That happens a lot. A lot of people think they're having a heart attack when they have a panic attack if they don't know what's going on, and a lot of people end up in emerge. And it takes some time often to figure out that it's actually a panic attack.
Crazy.
So why? Why did you have a panic attack? Do you have any idea?
I just think I was stressed and going through a bunch of changes in my life, and then they told me then I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
Really?
So yeah, and that was when I was 24, I think, or 22. And so it was, I was completely defiant of the whole thing when that happened, because I was like, no, you don't understand. There's something wrong with my body. Like, I'm like, no, it's not in my head.
Right.
There's like, my body's not working, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to have a heart attack, or I'm going to die in the middle of the night, and you're not helping me. And it was like, I was convinced. And I was so defiant of taking medication or doing anything like that, because I just thought I wasn't being heard, but I didn't understand about mental health issues or anxiety at the time.
Wow.
So education, obviously this is a topic that's near and dear to me, and I think education is a big thing, and definitely therapy. Tamara, what are some of the things that you work on with people who suffer from anxiety?
Right. So there's a couple of really good treatments that we do for example, generalized anxiety. So that would include cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's mindfulness-based CBT, or mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And then there's also the medication side that's also helpful for people. But in therapy, one of the first things we actually work on the behavior side of CBT is relaxation. Because when people are anxious, they're tense, their muscles are tense, and they actually, once we start talking about being relaxed and being calm, people realize they're tense all the time, and their muscles actually are rarely relaxed. And what we find out is it's impossible to be anxious and relaxed at the same time. So people start learning calming techniques, and we kind of, that's sort of part of the beginning of therapy. So deep breathing exercises, muscle relaxation, identifying other things that can help people relax, especially when they're anxious. And then the second part of treatment involves understanding how our anxious thoughts can affect physical symptoms of anxiety, and starting to learn techniques to become aware of our anxious thoughts and sort of reframing them into more helpful coping thoughts. And when people do this, they're actually sort of processing and sort of rewiring things in the brain, because often those anxious thoughts have been there for so long, they're automatic almost. And people say they're experiencing anxiety, and when I ask them what they're thinking, they start by saying, well, nothing. And then they start realizing, oh, yeah, I was thinking this, but then what if this happens, and what about that? You know, kind of, and it sort of snowballs, but it's so automatic, people aren't aware almost of those anxious thoughts. So we start slowing it down, becoming aware, and then looking at right away, how can people start thinking in a way that's sort of more helpful and realistic and more of a coping thought. And it's not about, you know, thinking positive. It's more about being realistic and helpful and making sure those thoughts don't run away on us. And that's similar to, what we do with depression as well. So for phobias or separation anxiety, treatment would involve what we call systematic desensitization or exposure. And for that, we'd work on just sort of tolerating the stimulus that might cause that anxious distress. So for separation anxiety during school, children would learn skills for coping with separation and then would, you know, practice being separated for longer and longer periods of time, or whatever that sort of feared, you know, stimulus is. And then mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy is a combination of something called mindfulness and CBT. So, for example, many people with generalized anxiety might worry about the future. So mindfulness teaches you ways to focus on sort of what's happening right now in the present, while CBT teaches you about thoughts or beliefs and behaviors. And actually something like yoga and meditation is also really helpful for people with anxiety as well.
And it takes work, right, Tamara? I mean, you don't just all of a sudden say, okay, I'm not going to think like this anymore, or I'm going to bring, when your thoughts are spiraling, they're spiraling, and then it takes a while until you recognize what's happening, and then you kind of incorporate your coping mechanism. So it's not a quick fix. You have to work at it.
Exactly, and my clients will tell you they work really hard, but it's worth it because, you know, treatment helps. And actually, you know, once depression or anxiety is recognized, treatment can make a difference for 80% of people who are affected.
Wow.
So that's really important to know. Is, you know, another reason for seeking help is people can improve and get better. And people are amazed sometimes when they come back in. They're going, wow, you know, this happened and I managed it, I coped, and I'm not feeling as anxious all the time, but they've worked really hard.
I'm actually curious now, Tamara, you mentioned 80% can kind of get through their depression with treatment. Do you see success stories all the time? Is like, let's talk about the hope aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a stat released by the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I think that's sort of probably an average stat based on data that they've collected. But yeah, there's definite improvement, you know, coming to therapy. It's a lot of it's learning tools. You know? A lot of it's education and learning tools. And once people get it and they understand what's going on, people are really quick to sort of tap into their own internal resources, and they have those tools, and then they can start. You know, I'm amazed people come back and go, yeah, and I did this, this, and this, and I think, wow, I never would have thought of that. You know, people start becoming experts in their own treatment. That's really what we want to get to.
I'll tell you my little coping mechanism when I was experiencing anxiety or panic attacks. It was I would adopted this Bob Marley song, Three Little Birds, and I would sing to myself, don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing's gonna be all right, and like just over and over in my head until I actually felt better.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's an excellent example, because what ends up happening with a lot of my clients is they do end up, in the end, like they do so much work, but they end up with a few mantras that are helpful for them that they kind of always go to, something like that. Sometimes it's a song, sometimes it's a funny memory, or just like an affirmation, but something that works for them and that they believe in. Absolutely.
Tamara, we're so happy to have you on the show this afternoon to get the conversations going, to keep these conversations happening. I think that's half of the battle as well, talking about these things, supporting one another, listening, and seeking treatment if you know we've experienced any of the symptoms that you've mentioned this afternoon. Tamara Darymple is a registered clinical counselor and mental health specialist at Synergy. We can find you in person at Quadra and Mackenzie or online at synergyhealthcounseling.com.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Tamara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Giving you the